The Pathbreakers is a podcast that uncovers stories of women who challenge conventions and carve their own legacies. While terms like women's empowerment and gender equality may sound modern, history reveals that women have long lived empowered lives. As philosophers, as warriors, as poets, often breaking barriers and inspiring generations. Through each episode, the Pathbreakers will shine a light on one remarkable woman from diverse walks of life, whose achievements have often been overshadowed by their male counterparts, reminding us, once again, that empowerment is not a new idea but a timeless reality. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Pathbreakers. This is Aloka Banerjee Shyam, and joining me is Divya Sampath. We wish all our listeners a very, very happy Navratri. All of us know about Ved Vyas or Rishi Markandya, but how many of us know about a Rishika named Vak Ambhrini, Rishi Vagambhrini or Vak Ambhrini, who preceded both of them? Vagambhrini was the daughter of Rishi Amran. She composed the Devi Suktam, which is the 125th Suktam in the 10th mandala of the Rig Veda. And this Suktam was composed more than 5,000 years ago. The Devi Suktam is chanted even today at every Shakti temple and during Navratri or Durga Puja, along with what we more popularly know as the Devi Mahatyam or the Durga Saptastuti. So this Navratri, let us talk about Vagambhrini and her Atmastuti or revealed poetry, which is the Devi Suktam, which form the essence of many other compositions like the Gita, which was composed at least 1500 years later, or the Markandeya Puran, which was composed about 2000 years later. Before we start, let us listen to the recital of the Devi Suktam, both the Vedic recital as well as the chorus that we as Bengalis have grown up listening to. I remember our parents used to call us at 4 a.m. to listen to the Mahalaya. Now, for listeners, Mahalaya is basically the Amavasya, the day which culminates the Pitru Paksh and the day before the Paksh starts, which is the Navratri, a day before the Navratri. So every Mahalaya, all Bengalis like me, earlier is to be woken up at 4 a.m. to listen to the Chandipat, which was recited by Virendra Krishna Bhadra, along with a lot of chorus. And the Devi Suktam was an intrinsic part of that Mahalaya. So let's start with listening to the Vedic chanting of the Devi Suktam, followed by the Mahalaya chorus.
Aham rudrebhirvasubhishcharamyahamaadityairuta vishvadevai Aham mitra varuno bhabibarmyaham indragni aham yashvino bhab Aham somamahanasam vibharmyaham tvashtaramutta pushanam bhagam Aham dadhami dravinam havishmate supravye
What we just heard now, the Devi Suktam, is one of the earliest hymns which actually identifies the divine mother or the feminine aspect of universal Godhead in the Rig Veda, which, as you pointed out, Aloka, is believed to be at least 5,000 years old, if not more. So possibly the most unique feature of the Suktam, you and I have talked about this before, is one of the reasons it's so powerful is that this is a Suktam in the first person. This is a poet or a Rishika, a female Rishi, speaking in the first person, and these are the verses or the Suktam which form part of the Rig Veda, which are called the Devi Suktam. So here, what we hear is the voice of the mother goddess herself, who is known by many names in Hindu tradition, Adi Parashakti, and so on. Vak Ambhrini is singing or speaking or reciting these verses as the mother goddess herself. So in this particular case, it is the Rishika, or the person who is the composer of the verses. The Vedas are believed to be revealed to the Rishis and Rishikas directly from the cosmic reality or the universal consciousness and shared with the rest of the world. So in this particular case, we can view it, and there are different schools of philosophy which teach us different interpretations of this. It's either the Rishika identifying herself directly with the universal divinity, so it's the mother goddess speaking, or it could be the Rishika who is possessed by the spirit of the mother goddess who then speaks through the Rishika herself. There are different ways to interpret the way that this series of verses comes to us. But it is, regardless of which approach you take, it's an incredible series of verses.
So like Divya rightly said, is the Devi Suktam is where the seer becomes the seen. So the Vagambhrini here is the Devi herself. She, whether she is possessed or she in unification and united with the Devi herself, she is in that state of supreme bliss, the Divine Mother herself. She has totally impersonified or identifies herself with the Divine Mother. So, like Divya was saying, whether it's a Devi speaking through her, or she is possessed or identifying total, complete identification with the Mother, this is what is the Atmastuti, where the elucidation is by the goddess herself. And is actually Adi Parashakti herself talking about I am. And actually, in one of the verses, she actually says, it is I who speak, the ones who are capable can hear me. It is part of one of the phrases. We'll come to that shortly. Talking about before we go to the Devi Suktam, I think that there's a thing about the Chanda, which Divya was very beautifully was mentioning the other day, how the Anustup Chanda is what the Mahabharata and the Gita, and this has a different Chanda to it, and how the Chanda is actually the way the meters actually talks about, it changes the rhythm, the way it is chanted and the rhythm of the entire composition. Divya, off to you. You do that beautifully.
Okay, right. So, thanks, Aloka. No, it is, first of all, thanks for setting the context. And I think we should talk about this a little bit later in the podcast in terms of the Vedas themselves, their place, and how they play a role. You already situated us from a temporal perspective, saying that the Rig Veda was composed at least 5,000 years ago and possibly earlier, we don't know. So, we're talking about female Rishika Vagambhrini composing verses in the Rig Veda. Now, it's kind of interesting because this is all of the Vedas were largely transmitted initially purely by oral tradition. So it's Shruti, it's sort of the heard, revealed truth of the universe that they're supposed to be conveying, at least. You know, if you're a follower of Vedanta, that's what you believe. It's very interesting, just looking at them in the form of poetry, it comes in a sort of a very interesting to hear it, what we just heard, that divine sound of the recitation. It's composed in a meter that's called Prishtup. One of the meters that's very commonly known in India would probably be the Anushtup Chanda, because that's the one that's used to compose the majority of the Ramayana and Mahabharata. So even the shlokas which are excerpted from the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, like the Vishnu Sahasranam or the Aditya Hridaya Stotram from the Ramayana, are in Anushtup Chanda, which is basically a syllabic pattern of 4 padas of 8 syllables. This one, like the vast majority of the verses in the Rig Veda, is in the Trishtup Chanda, which has 4 feet of lines of 11 syllables. So, not only is the Sanskrit used in the Rig Veda much more ancient than classical Sanskrit, but the intonation and the syllabic patterns are also very different. And it is a masterwork of poetry. Quite, even if you take out the religious aspects of this, just as a piece of our global cultural heritage, it's an incredibly composed, very, very vivid description of the nature of universal reality, which remains captivating to this day.
So, yeah, right, like you were saying, this is such a powerful thing. We are talking about Adi Parashakti through or Vagambhrini, whoever is the seeker, or the seer or the seen, talking about this feminine energy which is all pervasive, all permeating. And I think this is unifying, the other concept is here, which is unifying the divine and the individual. Because here she is saying, I am part of the universe and I am also dispersed in different human beings. So this is an amazingly powerful concept. And I think this is the first, one of the earliest recorded compositions where the feminine energy is all pervading. I think that is the powerful part of it. And when we talk rightly about Shruti, Vak Ambhrini, the word Vak itself means the primordial sound of speech. So while Vagambhrini is speaking, whether it is the Devi or she speaking, it is the Vak. And like you rightly mentioned, Divya, a while ago, that earlier it used to be Shruti. So people used to listen when, so it is the sound and the way you're talking, and that is to pass on from generation to generations as Shruti. So that Vak, the concept of Vak, is so important to this entire Suktam.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like at this point, maybe we should add a little bit of additional context for some of our non-Hindu listeners and maybe some of our non-Indian listeners as well. So I think you talked a little bit about this, but from a Hindu holy text perspective, or what we call it, is largely initially passed down mainly by the oral tradition and then noted down at a later date. So there are these different texts which are of importance to people who practice mainstream Veda aligned Hinduism, schools of philosophy. So the first is really the Vedas, which are the oldest four texts. So Ved Vyasa, who also is the composer of the Mahabharata, acquired his epithet Veda Vyasa by categorizing the Vedas into four branches, which are respectively the Rig Veda, which is the oldest, which has the revealed truths or the revealed verses reflecting the reality of the cosmos and all creation, supposedly. And each of the Vedas has commentaries attached to it, and the most sort of important commentaries are called Upanishads, of which there are more than 100, but there are between 10 to 13, 10 to 18 really, which are considered the principal Upanishads, which are associated with respective Vedas. And we'll be talking about some of the episodes from the Upanishad. These are basically used to discourse and reveal and shed a little bit more light, elaborate on the concepts in the Rig Veda. There are also the Puranas, which take a storytelling approach, again, to elaborate more on the lessons to be learned from the Vedas. And then there are what we call the Itihasic Puranas, or the historical Puranas, which are believed to have been recorded history, which is the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. So back to you, Aloka, to talk a little bit more about the context of Vak Ambhrini, the Devi Suktam, and the world that she lived in, and the role that she played.
Before I just wanted to add one line when Divya was mentioning about the Vedas and the Puranas and the Itihasas. The timelines of that would be, just to put a context to that, is while the Vedas, the oldest of which is the Rig Veda, is about 5,000, at least 5,000 years ago. So the Puranas, the Itihasas would be about 1,500 years after that, and the Puranas would be another 2,000 years after that. So when we talk about the Markandya Purana, where the Devi Mahatma we just spoke about, it was written about 1,700 to 2,000 years after the Devi Suktam. So just to put a little bit of timeline for context. And now going back to the Devi Suktam, another interesting feature that we were talking about, Divya, is the concept of oneness of the individual, which is the Atman, and the divine, which is the Brahma. Now, and this has been further extrapolated and elaborated when we talk about the Gita in the Vishwarup Darshan of Sri Krishna, where he says, I am everyone, I am your Atma, I am present in each of you. And he also goes on to say that Devta mein main Indra hu, Pakshiyon mein main Garur hu. Basically, he's trying to say that I am everywhere. I am the cosmos, and the cosmos is me. That is the unification of the divine and the Atma. And later on, again in the Devi Mahatma, which we will be going into a little more details a little later, is the same concept of the oneness. When the Devi herself says that, when we come to Ya Devi Sarvabhutesu Vishnu Maya Samastita, which means I am present in all of you as Vishnu Maya. So I am your Shuddha. Namastashve, 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 Namo Nama. We said, Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Shakti Rupe Samastita, means I am there with you as Shakti, as Nidra, as sleep, as power, as everything. So, this concept is further elaborated centuries later. And what makes the Vak Suktam so special is 5,000 years ago, this is the essence or the same concept. It was composed as a hymn, which is relevant even today.
Yeah. No, you're so right. And I think the analogy that you had was such an important one, right? Because we very rarely have in our scriptures or holy texts the divinity speaking in first person. So the Vak Suktam is one example. You cited another, that very famous Bhagavad Gita episode where Lord Krishna reveals to Arjuna the basically universal reality itself. And this is exactly the same message, except in this case, the Devi is speaking in her feminine persona, and in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna is speaking in a masculine persona, but the message is exactly the same. And these, as you pointed out, Aloka, so have influenced all of these other Upanishadic verses that have come to us, these Puranic prayers that have come to us that are still recited today. The Yadevi Sarvabhuteshu is actually third person, right? It is from the
Yeah,
Markandeya
this is.
Puran that you will talk
Yeah,
about.
yeah,
But
yeah,
it's what
yeah.
we're
We'll talk about
fundamentally
that.
saying
Yeah,
there is,
yeah,
instead of the goddess herself saying, we are addressing her. The speaker is addressing her, saying, O
yeah,
Devi, hail, O Devi, who
yeah,
is
yeah,
the
yeah,
Vishnu
yeah.
Maya present in, who is the being present in all living beings. You are the Vishnu Maya in
Exactly,
all living
exactly.
things. We hail you. So it's third person, but it's invoking that goddess, but using the very
Invoking.
same concepts that Vak Ambhrini plays out as the mother goddess in the Devi Suktam, which is for
Yeah,
the Vak Suktam.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's one of the unique features of the Devi Suktam by Vagambhrini. Now, before we deep dive into a little more of the meanings of the Devi Suktam, we want to clarify that there are two Devi Suktams, right? So that's what we want to clarify. One is the Devi Suktam, which is the Vagambhrini Devi Suktam, or the Vak Suktam as is known as. The other is the one which is the fifth chapter of the 13 chapters of Markandeya Puran, which is known as Devi Mahatmya. Now, the Markandeya Puran has 13 chapters, which is dedicated to the Devi, which talks about her various manifestations, and it talks about her vanquishing various demons like the Mahishasur Mardini. She is the vanquisher of Madhukaitav. She is the vanquisher of Shum Nishum. So these 13 chapters talk about the Devi and her various manifestations, and out of which the fifth chapter is also known as the Devi Suktam, which we talked about, the Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu, where the Devas are actually invoking the Devi to arise and vanquish the demons Shumb and Nishumb, who were given boons that they could be vanquished only by a woman. So that is another Devi Suktam. So these are the two, but both of them are recited together. Like when you're reciting the Chandipat or the Durga Saptastuti, which is more popularly known because Anuradha Padwal has sung it in her mellifluous voice many times. So that Suktam is all sung together. I mean, traditionally, when you actually recite the Devi Mahatmya, you recite the Vak Suktam at the end before the Shama Prarthana. So that is the sequence of how you do the Chandipat or the Devi, or you chant the Devi Mahatmya.
That's so interesting because down south and different parts of India follow, I think, Devi worship in slightly different ways. Down south, it's much more pop. So there are two recitals which typically happen during Navratri for the goddess. I mean, there are several, but I'll mention the two most important ones. One is a beautiful one called the Saundarya Lahari, which is basically Saundarya Lahari, the waves of the oceans of beauty, which is just descriptions of the goddess and her various. It's a collection. It's a whole compilation of beautiful stotras, of which the second Devi Suktam that you mentioned is actually an important part. And there's also the Lalita Sahasranam, which is 1,000 names of
Yeah, yeah,
goddess
yeah,
Lalita,
yeah, yeah,
which
yeah,
is
absolutely.
also recited very often. And the Devi Suktam actually appears in both the Saundarya Lahiri as well as the uh, Lalita Sahasranam.
So,
And usually it's a bunch of women, by the way, in down south, Soundarya Lahari, men and women can decide, but it is a tradition and Navratri for women to get together and decide for Soundarya Lahari. It's a social practice that I've seen since my childhood.
yeah, I can. Like I said, we woke. I mean, we on 4 a.m. we used to wake up to listen to the Mala. Nowadays, it's available on the YouTube, so we don't need. Nobody needs to wake up
To
early.
wake up morning. I still for festivals I still have the because I
Yeah,
again it's a family habit. So getting up at 4 a.m. very entrenched.
absolutely.
For
Time for
before sunrise
yeah.
are the
Yeah.
Brahmavadinis.
So coming back to the Devi Suktam, while we are discussing, it is an extremely what we said. It's an extremely powerful and beautifully written poem. And every time it starts with aham. Aham means I. So the Devi through Vagambhrini or Vagambhrini through the Devi, again we keep on repeating that. She says, aham, I am the one who move along the Rudras, the Vasus, the Adityas. I am the Vishwadevas. So she is actually bringing the entire echelon of the gods together in that one single platform. She says, I uphold Mitra and Varuna, both Indra and Agni, and also the Ashwin brothers. So she is trying here, she's saying that I am the one who's empowering the all powerful gods on the devas that you worship. Diva, I think you mentioned something interesting about the elements out here. Would you want to just
That's
bring
right.
that out again?
No, that's right, and thank you for pointing that out because in the Rig Vedic tradition, each of the while there is a universal reality or Parabrahma or Brahman, many terms used for that, one sort of universal formless, eternal Godhead. There are all of these other deities which are manifestations of the universal Godhead, which have specific responsibilities. And one of those manifestations, each of the deities mentioned, even in that first verse, Rudra, the Vasu, the Adityas, Indra, Agni, Varuna, Mitra, these are gods who have specific responsibilities, and they actually cover all of the five key elements which form the cosmos in the Vedic thought, as well as the ones that affect human beings. So, for example, the Ashwins are actually the god of health.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
Mitra,
absolutely.
so Indra, Mitra, and Agni, for example, were the gods of the sky, the weather, rain, waters, as well as fire. Is the ultimate reality, which is me. That's what she's saying.
Yeah, and she goes on. I mean, she goes on to everywhere. She said, "I am the queen." I mean, look at the power. Look at the sheer power of the sentence. I am the queen, and I am the receiver, first receiver of all oblations or all offerings that are made in any fire offering or what we call popularly yagya. So she's saying, I am the first of all gods who is a recipient of all of that, right? And she also says that the gods have placed me in various bodies on various places. Now, one interpretation of that can also mean that she is present in every human or every living being, whether entire universe. Well, we said she's, I mean, the God, or she's omnipresent in every place. So that's another way of saying that.
She's
And
literally
I
saying that in the next
empower
verse.
everyone.
That's
Sorry?
exactly what she's saying in the next verse. She literally goes on
Yeah.
to say that in the next verse. Everyone that breathes is breathing through me.
Yeah, she says, he who eats food, he who sees, who breathes, who hears the spoken word, does so through me alone, right? So if and she also, I mean, the most interesting part, the one I really love is when she says, I am the one who bent the bow of Rudra for his arrows to vanquish the non-believers of Brahma, of the Brahman or the Brahma, what you were. Parabrahma, the Brahma that you call. And I mean, look at the imagery. If you just imagine that I am the one who is actually helping, I mean, bending the bow of Rudra. I mean, that very imagery itself evokes so much power. Then again, she goes to that my source is in the oceans, which one, again, another interpretation saying that I am the cosmic ocean, or I arise from the ocean. So it is again the unification of the self or of the individual and the divine. Yeah, Divya wanted to say something?
No, I mean, I think you were saying it very well, just to sort of add a couple of elements to that. You're right. And that imagery can be seen or interpreted in so many different ways, right? So basically what she's saying, the message to take away is like, I am the force that causes all of these, momentous actions to occur. Whether it is, divine force vanquishing force of evil, whether it is, I am the source of everything, and the source of everything is me. That's literally what he says in the Suktam. So basically the ocean, the cosmic ocean is what is being referred to as,
Yes, I mean we can do an entire episode on the ocean. So I mean the ocean is like all pervasive, and here she's obviously meaning the cosmic ocean, but the layers in that is just amazing. So the more we kind of peel the layers, the more in awe are we of the entire Suktam and what was written. It was magnificent what was written so many thousand years ago, right?
Absolutely.
And
It's 8
and
pairs of whole lines. So 32 lines of 11 syllables each, and yet it encompasses literally the universe and all of it. It's amazing.
absolutely, totally. And when we come to the Devi Suktam of the Durga Saptastati, I mean, the essence is again the same. See, the essence has been carried forward across centuries.
Yep.
When we said that it was written about 2000 years later, the essence is the same. Just the presentation, elaboration, and is different.
Absolutely. No, in a way, you could look at it because the Upanishads and the Purans illustrate the lessons of the Vedas. Think of it as another way to look at this would be the
Correct.
people who heard the lesson of the Vak Suktam are now repeating and invoking the goddess using her own words and her own terms because she told us, and the Devas themselves are sort of, obviously, trying to invoke her because they're also part of her creation. They're using the same terms that she told them about herself.
Absolutely.
So they invoke her using literally the same terms, using different words. But these are, in a sense, they're good students, right? Absorb the lessons that were imparted to them in the Rig Veda,
absolutely.
and they're using, and they're actually repeating it back, and
It is just elaborated. The 8 verse got kind of obviously you have the stories of her vanquishing the evils, but it's like, as you rightly said, the student have gone and taking it further and made it in a more storytelling, like the Puranas, like we've already mentioned, at a more of a storytelling way of telling this same concept, right? And I think that is what makes the Vak Suktam so relevant and so exquisite that even today we are, we can connect with so many different scriptural works, and also it is still recited everywhere, and it is an integral part of Devi Puja, of a Navratri or a Durga Puja or any other Devi Puja. Yeah, so basically we are talking about the contribution that Vagambhrini made. It is not only one of the oldest recorded poet or spiritual verses written, she has also been a remarkable Rishika, right? She has actually laid down the tenets of Shaktiism, which is even followed even today. And by doing all of this, she has actually elevated. She is a Brahmavadini, and Brahmavadini, well, like we have already discussed, or I don't think we have yet discussed, the Brahmavadini are women scholars and philosophers who dedicate their life in learning, who learn the Vedas, and who also spend their lives in teaching. And so she has elevated the status of women in Rig Veda. We shall shortly talk about other important women in Rig Veda, but Vagambhrini definitely takes the spotlight. She definitely is one of the most important Vedic philosophers.
absolutely. Exactly as you said, I think, and the word Brahmavadini itself is a very evocative one, right? Because it literally means one who speaks the truth of Vadini, one who speaks, a feminine word, of Brahma, which is the universal reality. So someone who speaks about the truths of universal reality and teaches others. And these women, of whom there are between 25 to 30 of them Rishikas who contributed to the Rig Veda, were clearly equally seen as important contributors to this key foundational set of verses that was so important to that civilization at the time. This is such a foundational text, and it's still followed many thousands of years later today. And it's been passed on in a fairly unchanged format, with all scholars universally agree that it's changed very little. So it's so interesting that these women were not, they're not separated in the Rig Veda. They're not called out as something unusual. They're Rishikas, they're just acknowledged along with their male counterparts which kind of tells us a little bit about what their place in society at that time. And there are other Brahmavadinis who also contributed verses. We'll speak about a few more of them in this episode.
And I think we were also talking about at some point of time, I mean, we will come to the 30, Rig Veda talks about 30 Brahmavadinis or Rishikas who are some of them are very important, like Lopamudra. We will talk about Gargi, we will talk about Maitri. But before that, I think we would also, we wanted the goddess who embodies, actually, she has seen as a warrior. So the feminine energy, the goddess, is being represented as a warrior. While we are talking about the goddess and warrior, maybe we should talk about a couple of those Rishikas who were warriors. Actually, in the Rig Veda, we actually saw a lot of women who have had various roles, some as charioteers, some as warriors. So like you were mentioning about, I think, Indrasena. I think I'm over to you, Divya, to discuss Indrasena.
Right. So other than the Rishikas who contributed directly to the Rig Veda also has verses which talk about women. And a couple of, and they are in not necessarily roles as, sort of very passive or background roles. The one you mentioned is actually the wife of Rishi Markandya. And the verses actually they're quite attractive actually. The story itself is quite captivating. He apparently is tired during a chariot race and he hands over the reins to his wife, who then takes over from him and wins the race with, as the verse tells us, her clothes fluttering in the wind. What a beautiful image. Racing the chariot to victory.
Yeah,
Her clothes fluttering in the wind. I love that. There's another verse which actually is in praise of the Ashwins, who are very important deities for human health and that sort of well-being. So she is a warrior called Vishpala who loses a leg in combat. And after that, a metal prosthetic leg is attached to her. And the verse thanks the Ashwins for allowing her to successfully, imbibe that prosthetic and then go back to war. So this is a warrior who lost a leg in war, leg is amputated, a prosthetic is fitted, and then she goes back to war. And this is in the Rig. It's not she thanking, by the way, this is a third person story, but those verses actually describe that thanks to the Ashwin, she was able to go back to war. So these women played, their society must have included women who studied the Vedas, who had access to knowledge, who not just domestic responsibilities, but in society they could bribe charities, own property, they played roles as administrators, they played roles in rituals.
We have seen women at war at the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. We have seen Kaikeyi at war. But this is far, many more centuries before Kaikeyi.
But again, that continuity, right? That women it was perfectly fine for some women to choose martial pursuits, right? It was perfectly fine for some women to pursue Vedic studies and philosophy and debate. We'll talk a little bit more about some of those great debaters.
And as I said, the Devi, the very concept of the Devi being a war queen, she is warring. That imagery itself says that women were used to warfare, like you rightly said. And these are amazing examples of women who are charioteers and going back after losing a limb is.
Yeah, but very often for us, it's very interesting because the Devi Suktam actually captures the goddess as creator, as animator, as the cause of the universe, as one who uplifts being, as one who punishes evildoers. So she's playing all of these different roles and she's identifying with, the person who's causing all of these important actions to be taken as well. So that I think is fairly unique.
Yeah, absolutely. And a few other things that we were discussing, I think, is also that in Vedic, in the Vedic times, we have seen that women and daughters could actually do all kinds of rituals, including funeral, the last rites or the funeral rites of their parents or their deceased. This happened 5,000 years ago. The Vedic women actually did all rituals, whether it was a yagya, whether it was funeral rites. They actually had right to property. So, they had pivotal roles in almost every walk of life.
Let's talk a bit more about some of the other Rishikas who are...
Yeah. Starting with Lopamudra, I think. Lopamudra is a very interesting and very renowned Rishika. She was married to sage Agastya, who himself was very famous. But the interesting part about Lopamudra is, despite being married to a very powerful and a very well-known sage, she did not lose her individuality. She actually this entire conversation is credited to her, which she is having with her husband Agastya, which is, I think, the Rig Veda hymn 1.179, in which she is actually bringing forth the importance of her own needs, whether it is emotional or other marital needs. And she emphasizes on the importance of fulfillment of those alongside the ascetic pursuits of sage Agastya. And I think, Divya, I think you will bring around the progeny and how sage Agastya had married her because he wanted an heir and the conditions that she laid down for that. So please.
Okay, so no, that's another interesting. So both Agastya and Lopamudra important contributors to the Rig Veda, and their stories are elaborated in the Itihasic Purans, in the Ramayana, Mahabharata as well as some of the other Purans. But the most commonly known version of the story is Lopamudra was a specially created perfect woman who was then given in marriage to the sage Agastya, who asked for her hand in marriage because Agastya got originally who was practicing austerities as an ascetic and was practicing brahmacharya or the path of celibacy, had this prophetic vision or dream, or there was a revelation to him that his ancestors were kind of suspended, head down over a vast gorge or canyon. And when he was horrified by this and asked, "Who are you?" and they said, "We are your ancestors who are waiting for you to have progeny and actually be married, have progeny, and perform the ancestral rites so our souls can be liberated." So this was the reason Agastya decided to get married. He asked for Lopamudra's hand, and her parents initially she's actually adopted by a king and his queen, so they're very reluctant to can our daughter, adjust to the aesthetic lifestyle, etc. But Lopamudra volunteers and happily goes ahead, joins Agastya, and then Agastya, eventually gets around. He initially continues with his ascetic ways, but he then eventually turns to his wife and says, we should get on with this whole begetting of progeny. And at this point, she very wisely and I think rightfully says, look, it's all very well to want progeny in the world, but you have to ensure that your wife's material needs, physical needs, emotional needs are taken care of.
Absolutely.
And we create a good environment for progeny to be born. So she basically tells him. So she's actually, this particular Rigvedic sequence is very important because it underlines the fact that we don't have to renounce the material world in order to achieve enlightenment. You can fulfill your duties, and there is still a path to enlightenment while fulfilling your duties in the material normal world as a husband, as a wife, and so on and so forth. That's, I think, incredibly important as well.
Yeah, and I think this is also, I think this is very important. This is, I think, each of these Vedic women, they had, through their dialogues, whether it's with a husband or with a philosopher or with another rishi or a rishika, they actually bring out very important facts or factors, which then goes down as teachings of Hinduism. Like this thing that you mentioned, like right now, Divya, that you do not have to renounce the world to do, and it is also taught in the Gita, right? It has been taken forward that you don't have to renounce the world, a materialistic world. You can do both side by side, and it has been taught as late as Ramakrishna Paramahansa and Swami Vivekananda. I mean, Vivekananda obviously did not marry, but Ramakrishna did say that you can be a householder. That's what he told Rani Rasmani, that you don't have to give up your kingdom to be a bhakt or to be a follower of Ma Kali. So, as I said, it is being followed even in recent times.
True. And I think the important message that all of these texts call out and all of these teachers also call out is it's not the material itself, like the whole dialogue actually says. It's about your attachment to these material things that keeps you from enlightenment and liberation from reincarnation.
And you're coming to our next Vedic philosopher, Gargi Vachaknavi. She is very prominently mentioned in the Upanishad called Aranyaka Upanishad. When this, I think, we already mentioned, there's about 13 to 18 Upanishads, which are important amongst the hundreds of them written. But the Aranyaka Upanishad is almost at the top in terms of its importance. And when we actually go about who are the important philosophers in this Upanishad, there are some 4 or 5 names come out of which one is Yagyavalkya, the other is Uppala, 3 is Gargi, and fourth is Maitri. Now, right now, we will discuss Gargi and her famous debate with the philosopher of those days, Yagyavalkya, in the court of a very well-known king called King Janaka. All of us know him as the king of Videhi, or Sita's father. He is also, but one thing we have to tell King Janaka is he was also somebody who really supported philosophers and in his court. So there was a Brahma Yajna which was happening in the court of Janaka, where he offered 1,000 cows with horns adorned with gold to be given to the most successful, or I think the best philosopher, let us put it in that way. And Yagyavalkya, another philosopher of that age, was so confident of his win, he told his disciple to take the cows home. That is when 9, or the Navratnas, there were eight other philosophers along with Gargi, stood up to actually combat him in philosophical debate. Over to you, Divya, to give us the details on this.
I love the fact that in Gargi Vachaknavi is probably one of the female mythicas who actually has some prominence in popular culture thanks to Hindi serials. So her name is at least known, I hope, by a few people.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
Gargi,
Siyakiram.
yes, correct. Siyakiram,
Siyakiram.
you are correct. That's right. So Gargi Vachaknavi, her name Gargi obviously is her personal name. Vachaknavi, like Amrini, is a reference to her father, the sage Vachaknu. So who was she? You already mentioned she was one of the Navratnas of King Janaka's court. And King Janaka himself was a renowned scholar. He was a Raja Rishi, very famously. So he only supported the best in his court. And he called this massive yajna and invited philosophers and scholars from around the known world at the time to come and attend and bless the ceremony with their presence. Yajnavalkya also attended with his entourage of disciples, and he was so confident, as you said, that. And I'm picturing this whole thing that there's 1,000 cows all jingling with gold hanging from their horn, and this gentleman is very calmly and coolly tells his disciples to take away the herd and take it to my ashram. And at this point, Gargi stands up to debate him. And the way she actually framed this, actually, you should talk about this, Aloka. Why don't you say about why don't you repeat what you said before about how her approach
Yeah,
to
I mean,
debating Yajnavalkya?
yeah, so Gargi actually, she uses the metaphor of weaving, because weaving is very, synonymous with women. So she uses the metaphor of weaving, and she asks two brilliant questions. I mean, one question led to the other, but the two questions literally stumped or kind of made Yagyavalkya think was, because they were talking about the world and what is woven, and so she said, since this entire world is woven back and forth on what then is water woven back and forth? So when Yagyavalkya answered that, then Gargi's next question was, in what is then space woven in back and forth? To which Yagyavalkya's his final answer was the imperishable, the concept which describes that which sees but cannot be seen, that which hears but cannot be heard, that which thinks that cannot be thought. Basically, he was talking about the immeasurable Brahma, which has no bounds. So, and before Gargi could answer or ask any more questions, he said, let's stop here. So,
That's an interesting debate. So the episode in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is one of the 8 Upanishads, key Upanishads attached to the Yajurveda, actually is very, very interestingly. That whole dialogue, it almost plays out that way, where she starts off with saying, she asks a simple question saying, what is the nature, using the metaphor of weaving. She asks, what is the nature of earth that we live in, our world? What is it woven back and forth? And his first answer is, it's woven on water. So it progresses through, and therefore then what is ocean and water woven back and forth? And heat is air, and so on and so forth, until they get to space. And she asks, and what is space woven back and forth on? And he said, anyone who has spent his entire life learning but does not know of this eternal, imperishable vast, who is formless, fathomless, perceives all but cannot be perceived, and so on, then he has wasted his life or her life. And then she asks this final question, which is what Yajnavalkya basically responds to, saying, she says, and okay, then this eternal imperative, what is that? That realm, what is that woven back and forth on? I'm still using that reading metaphor. She's using the same structure, and he says, stop there, because you will not be. This is the limit of what we can handle or human beings can handle. So stop there. This question cannot be answered. It is not something that human beings can have the capacity to absorb. And at this point, but Gargi accepts that answer, turns to the rest of the group and says, "You folks have no hope of defeating this man in a debate. Let him take his cows."
She also realized that, Divya, that she has reached a level, because she herself was she was learned in the Vedas, and she was very, very learned herself. So she also realized that I have reached the nadir, we call the end of where this question can be taken forward.
Yes.
So,
right.
And then she literally said, she conceded, she said that no way that let him take his cows, no way we can
Will not be. You will
you
not
guys
be.
can,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah, you
You won't
can't be
outdo him
defeated.
in argument or logic, is or knowledge.
Yeah, yeah,
No,
yeah, yeah.
that's so important, right? That first of all, nobody sees it as unusual. Yajnavalkya himself.
Yeah, but the most important thing which you rightly mentioned is also that Yagnavalkya treated her as his peer. Gargi was treated as his equal. So, that is another part which we should be, for a few seconds, ponder, that here is a philosopher which is really famous, and we have Gargi asking his questions, which obviously are a different level altogether, but the guy is treating her as his peer. There is no sneering. There is no way he's actually looking down on her. But he, on the other hand, is respecting the level of questions and saying, stop there, because beyond this, understanding is difficult.
No, and
So, I
it's
think,
a respect. I think it's kind of he's everything respect, and maybe he was kind of used to treating women with respect because of something at home. So you want to talk about that in terms of what might have been one of the influences that made him respect women as intellectual equals?
yeah, so as we said, he is used to women asking him difficult questions, because he did have a wife in Maitri, and Maitri, when we come to Maitri, she's another amazing philosopher, and she is Yagavelka's wife, is one of his two wives, as we know. So yeah, and she actually asks him questions, which is mentioned very prominently once again in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, where she questions Yagnavalkya, does material pursuits get me immortality? To which he says, no, it is only your self-knowledge and renunciation which gives you moksha. Now, moksha is when we cut through the cycle of life and death, where we don't get born again. So the ultimate quest for any Hindu is achieving moksha, is when you don't have, or you're not reborn again.
Correct. So all the
So
major Indian religions for our sort of non-Indian listeners believe in the concept of reincarnation, and ultimately the goal of human life is supposed to be moksha or liberation from the cycle of reincarnation. So Hindus believe it, Buddhists believe it, Jains believe it, Sikhs believe it. All the major India-born religions believe in reincarnation, and liberation is the goal of human life.
absolutely. So this is, as I said, is one of the very important, it's one of the important learnings or teachings of the Upanishads, which and it is one of the core teachings of Hinduism, and where we talk about that renunciation and control and the knowledge of self is very important, or self-realization, as we talk about. And while he was discussing this, actually Yagnavalkya tells her that, it is one of the very important tenets of the Upanishad, is that it is your attachment to object is because of your love for yourself. So the attachment that we have for material objects, or even your husband, he goes to the extent of saying that even if your love for your husband is due to your love for yourself, we love what is around us because we love ourselves. So I think that is a very,
That's
very
true.
powerful thing.
True, and it's repeated in so many sacred texts about it because says the same thing. It's the reason why you're trapped in the cycle of reincarnation time and time again, is because you fail to realize the truth of what your soul is and what the truth of actual ultimate reality is, Brahman, Parabrahm, the ultimate reality. that ultimately yourself is yearning to go back to Brahman or to rejoin universal reality and recognize that it is part of universal reality. If you get attached to material things, then you'll never be able to achieve that realization.
What we can rightfully say is that the dialogue of Maitri with Yajnavalkya, her dialogue is regarded as a logical finale in the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, which is revolving and reinforcing the concept of renunciation and the pursuit of absolute truth. All the Rishikas that we talked about today, Vagambhrini or Lopamudra or Gargi or even for that matter Maitri, they have lived lives of philosophers, of teachers, spiritual educators. So they have literally elevated the contribution of women.
Maybe another way to look at this is to say that these women clearly played very important roles in the ancient Vedic society.
Yeah, we can actually, I think we can kind of safely say that the Vagambhrini, Gargi, Maitri are examples of women who held pivotal roles in society and who are capable of shaping philosophical and spiritual thought process which can be followed generations later. We started by saying that empowered women are not a modern concept. They have been there for centuries, even centuries even before we can think of, and they have set examples with their lives, whether as historians, whether as Vedic philosophers, whether as warriors, whether as queens, whether as freedom fighters. And what we at Pathbreakers, we would try and do, bring them or into the spotlight rather, and talk about their achievements.
Brilliant. No, and I love that. Today we mentioned we talked about some women, we mentioned a few more. We talked about, Vak Ambhrini and the Devi herself. And in our next episode, which we're both very excited about, we'll actually be talking about another very interesting and exciting woman. So a little bit of trivia to connect her to her name to today's episode. We talked about the wife of Sayyid Mudgal, Indrasena. Rishi Mudgal is the mother of a lady called Ahilya, who appears in the Ramayana, who was married to Sayyid Gautama. But the lady who was named after her, her namesake, Ahilya Bai Holkar, and we're very excited to talk about her. It's a name that everyone knows, but a life that not enough is known about.
Absolutely. So like you rightly said, our next episode is about Ahilya Bai Holkar. All of us are heard about her, but there are a lot of aspects in her life that we are not acquainted with. So we'll try and bring that in the best way possible. The next episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for listening to us, and wishing all of you a very happy Navratri once again. Thank you so much.
Happy Navratri to all.